Every day, something dramatic happens in the Caribbean that affects our lives. We'll give you the details. We'll give you the facts on Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick. Host Eddie Frederick.
So glad you can join us. The International Monetary Fund approves US $1.7 billion in funding to Jamaica. This story takes the lead in today's edition of Caribbean Perspective for Monday, 6th March 2023. Details when we return.
Hubbard's Multi-Department Mount Gay and Hubbard's Tire Bay, located at the Building Supplies Compound in Grand Anse, are reminding the motoring public that another round for licensing and inspection has begun. Just arrived on new shipments of quality furrowed and torque tires to fit all makes and models of vehicles at competitive pricing. Shop early to avoid the hassle of long lines. WhatsApp them on 473-405-5482. Hubbard's, quality service, affordable prices.
Welcome back. Jamaica can now draw down US $968 million as part of a 24-month arrangement with the IMF under the Precautionary and Liquidity Line, PLL. Javon Keys of TVJ News has more.
The IMF says the funds under the Precautionary and Liquidity Line, PLL, are expected to provide insurance risks from higher commodity prices, a global slowdown, tighter than envisaged global financial conditions, and new COVID-19 outbreaks. Commenting on the approval this afternoon, Finance Minister Dr. Nigel Clark says approval under the PPL is testament to the strength and resilience of the economy.
It's important to note that Jamaica has never before been able to qualify for an instrument like the PLL. The PLL is reserved for countries with strong economic fundamentals, for countries that have a track record of building institutions, and very importantly, a demonstrable commitment to implement sound economic policies into the future.
The finance minister says although Jamaica has $4 billion in gross reserves, the PLL provides an additional balance of payment buffer in the event of additional economic shocks. The funds under the Resilience and Sustainability Facility RSF will be used to strengthen physical and fiscal resilience to climate change, advance decarbonization of the economy, and manage transition risks. Funds under the RSF are being made available at an interest rate of 3.8%, with 20 years to repay and no principal repayment for the first 10 years.
So this facility helps Jamaica to reduce our refinancing risk and to create fiscal space as compared with the alternative of international capital market refinancing in a rising interest rate environment. Additionally, we expect that participation in the RSF will allow Jamaica to attract significant private sector climate investment as we implement policies conducive to climate financing.
High-level Constitutional Reform Committee established in Jamaica. Kimberly Henry of CVM Live has some details.
Minister of Constitutional Affairs Marlene Malahou-Fort says the High-Level Constitutional Reform Committee has been constituted and work has begun. The committee is to assist with providing oversight and advice. Malahou-Fort says the constitutional framework will be done in 3 phases.
And the first phase will primarily fall within this financial year. It will focus on the matters for which the votes of the electorate will be ultimately required to make the changes to the Constitution through the constitutional amendment bills.
Noting the work to be done is life-altering, Malahou-Fort spoke about the country's position on the legislative review process.
I do not think it is any secret that currently the legislative review process is riddled with inordinate delays, culminating in numerous pieces of legislation neither being amended, repealed, and replaced, nor developed and subsequently passed in a timely way.
The minister says, apart from scarcity of legal and policy officers, which impacts the process, there is also an overly ambitious legislative priority by ministers, citing issues such as high turnover rate, resulting in undone work.
An effort to address the issues that we have found. Cabinet approved the establishment of legislative teams in each ministry to include relevant policy officers, relevant legal officers, relevant senior officers at the level of Chief Technical Director, principal director or senior director responsible for working closely with the relevant policy and legal officers, other policy and legal officers within the ministry to provide oversight of the legislation program.
Malou Fort added a legal educational program will be implemented across sectors. An online portal for the access of the laws of Jamaica is also being implemented. The 2023-2024 total expenditure for both salaries and programs is estimated at $875 million. Kimberly Henry for CVM Live.
You're listening to Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick. Productivity and digital adaptation in Trinidad and Tobago are on the up, but the country still has work to do to improve the ease of doing business. That's the view of Central Bank Governor Dr. Alvin Hilaire. CNC3's Peter Christopher tells us more.
Central Bank Governor Dr. Alvin Hilaire says despite the many shocks the economy has faced as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, there are positives that can be built upon. The governor notes labor productivity increased since the pandemic.
And what that shows, even if you can't believe the exact numbers, is that productivity of the labor employed had increased. And it is not actually that surprising, because you had people being able to do more with less, as it were. You had efficiency gains, and with either less people, so employment may have been less, but output may have continued, or less hours worked, less overtime, and so forth.
Dr. Hilaire was speaking during the United Nations Global Economic Update Seminar held at the Hyatt Regency on Thursday. The governor also explained that the adoption of digital methods of payment and conducting business has helped improve the ease of doing business in Trinidad and Tobago, but the country is still falling short in key areas.
But at the end of it all, I think we still have some work to do, and probably some serious work to do, because local and foreign potential investors still report that it is tricky to get things done in Trinidad and Tobago.
Still on Trinidad and Tobago, the Commissioner of Police there has ordered an investigation into the allegation that senior government officials are involved in human trafficking.
Trinidad and Tobago Police Service Thursday stated that the top cop met with the director of the counter trafficking unit and has appointed a special team of officers to investigate the matter. These allegations of human trafficking are serious and will not be taken lightly. Hear what Christopher said in giving the assurance that the matter will be vigorously pursued and thoroughly investigated. Controversy erupted at the Parliament setting last Friday after opposition MP Rodney Charles said the United States' July 2022 Trafficking in Persons report stated that Trinidad and Tobago remains its position on the Tier 2 watch list, in part because it did not take action against senior government officials alleged in 2020 to be involved in human trafficking. The matter escalated over the weekend with opposition leader Kamala Persad-Bezizar saying the report was not referring to opposition officials.
Antigua's Prime Minister Gaston Brown has made a proposal which he says would significantly address the region's air transport woes. Garfield Burford of ABS News filed this report.
The issue of regional air transportation has been a thorny one for years. What had been chronic before is now acute. The government in St. John's has saved LIAT from liquidation. It's now under administration with a leaner operation since its return. Prime Minister Honorable Gaston Brown has engaged with regional colleagues on the issue of regional transportation in 2 recent meetings, but he's far from pleased with the outcome.
Clearly, there's no commitment coming from regional governments to support a regional airline that is publicly owned. I think the consensus is that we should rely on private assets and possibly with the CAL assets. I understand that they're investing some additional ATRs.
Now here is the Prime Minister's proposal to improve the air transport service available in the region.
I'm of the view that the OECS sub-region in Barbados should have a public sector entity to form the core of regional transportation, and that airline, whatever it is called, could be supplemented by the private carriers. But I suspect that many of the leaders within the region do not wish to engage in the ownership of an airline because it is capital intensive, requires a significant amount of resources.
He fears the regional integration project could be seriously undermined if this issue is not addressed.
If we're really truly interested in preserving our integration movement to ensure effective connectivity for our people, we have to understand that integration comes with some costs, including the cost to connect our people, to ensure the movement of people, movement of goods. And that in itself requires reliable transportation.
There have been several studies, rhetoric, and analysis, but this has not led to the results the region requires. In recent months, for example, the Caribbean Development Bank, the CDB, approved a technical assistance grant to go towards developing interim arrangements to address the air transportation crisis. In the meantime, Prime Minister Brown says his administration remains committed to keeping LIAT in the skies.
Intensive requires a significant amount of resources. But Antigua and Barbuda will continue to persist with LIAT and to include the restructuring of LIAT. And at the same time, I'm hoping that sentiments about a publicly owned airline will change.
As St. Kitts and Nevis weathers the current external economic shocks, it is critical that structural reforms and strategic investments are made, says Governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, Timothy N.J. Antoine. He was the keynote speaker at the annual general meeting and luncheon of the St. Kitts and Nevis Chamber of Industry and Commerce held on Tuesday at the St. Kitts Marriott Resort. Andre Huey of SKN Newsline has more.
I will therefore make the point that it is critical that we press on with structural reforms. And when I speak of structural reforms, I'm referring to things like improving the business environment. It cannot take and ought not to take 8 months to consolidate a few lots into one lot because of issues in the registry. It cannot. That has to change. And that's a simple example. And I know there were efforts to split up the registry, have single registrars and so on, but we have not gotten there yet. We have to reform our education system to shift from subject to skills to really be able to meet the moment in the 21st century. That's key. We have to be able to address the high cost of electricity by moving in the area of renewables. Just some examples, and I could go on, but I won't, in terms of what I mean by structural reforms.
The governor disclosed that the St. Kitts and Nevis economy is the 4th largest in the OACS, despite being one of the smallest nations in the sub-region. But this, he said, should not be reason for the country to rest on its economic progress.
You're only larger than Montserrat and Anguilla and Montserrat, in terms of size. But in terms of size of the population, but in terms of size of the economy, you are 4th largest. And of course, within that, of course, is the fact you also have the largest bank in the currency union. So there are some things that you've done well, but now you can't sit on your laurels, you need to press forward. And that's what we want to get into. This slide basically shows you what has happened to growth over the last few years. So recall in 2020, the pandemic. In the case of St. Kitts and Nevis is the blue, ECCU is green. What happened? ECCU, 16.5%, almost 17. St. Kitts and Nevis, 14.5%, almost 15%. Major contraction. 2021 in St. Kitts and Nevis, 0.9 contraction. And then last year, what did you do? 7.7. This year we are projecting 4.5%. Next year we are projecting 4.5%. And what you also see is that you are beginning to converge once again with the currency union.
The governor spoke on the theme, the performance and prospects of the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union. Andre Huey, SKN Newsline.
Hubbards is once again innovating the way you shop with its new online store, providing 24-hour shopping convenience. You can shop now for appliances, hardware, houseware, building material, and more. Free delivery island-wide. Start shopping now at hubbardshardware.gd. Safe, convenient, reliable.
I am Eddie Frederick. This has been Caribbean Perspective, a whole new approach to highlighting developments in the Caribbean. In the meantime, please continue to log on to CaribbeanPerspective.com for more daily news and more.